building social circles and dealing with toxic relationships. That is going to be the topic of today's video, and hopefully it's not too windy. We can get a little reprieve from the wind. It's been extremely gusty, and I know it picks up on the microphone, but we'll push through it anyway. Hopefully it doesn't impact the audio quality too much. So without further ado, toxic relationships and building your ultimate social circle. Let's dive right into it. I think we'll start with the social circle component, and this is one that's very dear to my heart, as I've been through a lot of situations where I have had to completely from scratch rebuild my social circle in the event of having just really toxic relationships that I had to get out of. In fact, having entire social circles that I had built up, whether it be around, doing drugs or just bad activities that didn't benefit me at all, completely in many ways were ruining my life. And in that situation, you just have to get the hell out. But assuming that you're not in a terrible place like I was, maybe you are, but that's besides the point. If you're looking to build a social circle quickly and effectively, I would say the first thing, and this sounds kind of redundant, like everyone says it, but write down what you want your ideal life to look like, because until you can actually put a finger and say, these are the types of people that I want to have, this is the type of partner that I want to have, this is where I want to live, like you need to get specific with it. How much time per week do you want to spend socializing? What types of people do you want to have in your network? What types of, vacations do you want to go on? What types of, are you more of a homebody? Are you more of an extrovert? You have to get really specific with all those things. And what most people end up doing when it comes to their social circle is it's pretty much either built around their work friends. So like if you go into an office, and I know now with COVID-19, everything's a little bit haywire, but traditionally, and still this is mainly the case, if you think about it, you probably have a job and most of your contacts kind of come from where you work at. So whether it's in, whatever the building kind of area it is, those are your acquaintances, those are your friendships. And if you think about it, you're really kind of closing the door off when you're looking at social circle, because you're basically isolating yourself and never really building your own ability to go out and network. And you're just relying on saying that you have to cultivate your friends from where you work. So even looking at people who end up getting married, most of the time, I don't know like what percentage, but I would say it's very high percentage meet at work. The other one that's really common, and this one is a little bit better, but is at school. So you'll see a lot of people, and this always kind of baffled me, and I was this way for a while, but people who are like 10 years out of high school where their social circle is still based on those same people. Like it's kind of that small town vibe where like it's like everyone just stays in their little comfort zone in their small town. And I guess there's nothing wrong with it. I guess in a way, it's kind of nice that you could have friendships for decades, but for people that want to be proactive, it's just terrible, because again, you're isolating yourself and you're never branching out and you're never building those really core abilities to network. And not only does this really relate to going out and finding people to date and make new friends, but it's really important for business and networking. And it's really easy now in the sense that back in the day, you would have to actually like go out, whereas now you can really build a social circle extremely efficiently just from your iPhone, just from even not leaving. And of course, I always say you want to balance the ability to be like kind of really good in real life, but also in the virtual world. But just remember that with social media, now building a social circle and networking is like on steroids, whether you're talking about Tinder or you're talking about, leveraging it on Instagram. A lot of times, if you want to get really good at going out and meeting new people, you can meet them out in actual public or wherever it is, whatever the venue is, club, grocery store, gym, doesn't matter. But you don't even have to get their number, because what you'll find, what I found, is that most people are very stingy with their cell phone number. They'll be like, oh, like if you go up and you just started talking to someone for a few minutes and then you kind of close it by saying, hey, let me get your cell phone number. It's very, people are very reserved with their number, but they are not at all with giving out their Instagram handle or their Facebook. And of course, as we know, it's easier. People are more accessible on those platforms. All of them have direct messaging. So I would say that's another huge tip when you're building the social circle, is realizing that screw the number. Like if you want to get intimate with people later on, you get the number, but really at first, just get the social media. And the beauty with social media, and this is not coming off as like nefarious or manipulative in any way, it's just simply like efficiency and building systems. But once you have social media, even if you're not directly DMing those people, you can put out little bits of social proof, little pings, just funny little things that they'll kind of get an idea of who you are, and in many ways you'll stay in the back of their mind. And I'm reading The Art of Seduction right now by Robert Greene, and it's really kind of a book that talks about, it's kind of funny. In many ways, there's like a lot of manipulative things that he talks about, and how to like get people to fall in love with you, how to attract different people, how to like basically like make them obsessed with you. And it's a long ass book. I would still recommend it. It's really good. But in many ways with social media, that's what you're doing. You're kind of pulling people into your circle, and then you're not directly pinging them, like you're not directly DMing them, but you're able to just put out a vast array of content that will keep you in their mind. And it's super easy because it's not time consuming. You just put it out, and then you could have hundreds, or if you have a huge network, maybe even thousands of people that see it. And it's also very liberating because then you are in that abundance frame. So going back to that frame of isolation from meeting people exclusively in your workplace or exclusively at your school, your small town, in these closed little networks, you're basically living in scarcity when you come from that time, that frame. And anytime you're in scarcity, you're kind of unhappy. You're kind of like, well, you know, I have these friends here and I can't lose them because I don't have the ability to go out and meet new people, or I don't have the network where I can just instantly contact other people, or I don't have the network where they're actually reaching out to me. And ultimately that's what you want to build, to where you're such in abundance. You know, scarcity is, again, the small town. Abundance is having a huge network. You want to ultimately transition yourself into abundance where you don't even have to do a lot of the reaching out anymore. You just have other people that are reaching out to you, to the point where you actually have to turn a lot of people away. And that's ultimate abundance. And again, this is not coming from a manipulation frame. It's purely coming from a kind of holistic, systematic, and efficiency frame. So those are some of the tips that I have for social circle building. I have a lot more stuff that I'm getting better at, and hopefully I can transfer it on to you guys. And I want to transition and talk a little bit about toxic relationships, and try to cover this mic up here. Super windy, man. I'm sorry if it's loud, but you know, let's pause it. It's getting real windy. I'll come back in here. All right, so trying to talk in through the wind. Anyway, transitioning to toxic relationships briefly, it really relates to the idea of scarcity. And what you have to realize is that most people are in scarcity, unfortunately. And as you get into higher levels of consciousness and personal development and bettering yourself and having a bigger network, living in abundance, you are going to have to cut ties with people from your past. And let's use the example of family members. What I always say is that you want to have a base level of love and acceptance and abundance always. And just because you don't spend as much time with them, number one, it's in both parties' best interests. And number two, what you definitely don't want to do, and you'll see this a lot in super like romantic but very toxic relationships, is the person or the two people will drag it out for so long, poison dripping and just being super toxic, because neither person wants to pull the trigger to cut it off, whether they're too timid, they don't know what they want, they're living in scarcity and they're afraid they won't be able to find something else, and it just festers and festers until eventually it implodes, and then it really is a just horrible situation. So you're always much better off ending it early on and not wasting months or even years, and then that way you can still stay friends, and remember that you always come from that level of baseline love and acceptance. So just because you spend less time or end a relationship doesn't mean that it then has to transition into this super negative, or it doesn't have to end in this huge culmination of fighting and aggressiveness or violence even. So I think that realizing that as you ascend upwards, as you start getting into more personal development, inevitably there are going to have to be a lot of relationships that you end. But remember, it's for both parties' own good, and I wouldn't look at it as a bad thing. It's really much worse to stay in those relationships. And what'll end up happening, and this is key, if you end up staying in one of those relationships, let's say it is with your family, or it's with a spouse or whatever, and you feel like that person's holding you back, what'll end up happening, and let's say hypothetically like this relationship goes on for years, ultimately you can't really ever rekindle that relationship because it'll just completely sour it to the point where you will not respect that person anymore. And this is a really hard one. Again, they want to avoid conflict as much as possible. I always say, if you come from like a fighting background, I know this is off a little bit on a tangent, but if you come from like a fighting background, like if you stand up and you start getting aggressive, 90% of people will back down. And it's just a biological response, right? It's a survival mechanism. People don't want conflict. And it's the same thing in relationships. Like, most people do not want to be the person to end the relationship. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll keep on creating more toxicity and more conflict until it just gets so bad that the other person ends it or whatever. It's like, oh, and then it's over, and then it ends terribly. So I don't want that to happen for you guys. So to kind of recap, building a social circle is a matter of cultivating abundance and getting out of scarcity, realizing that you're not limited to just where you work or where you go to school or the town that you live in. And it's easy now with social media, Instagram and Facebook. And just remember that it's much easier to get a lot of contacts through social media. And then you can start pinging by putting out little pieces of fun little things that you're doing, pictures that you want to take, places you're going. And it's not like you're direct messaging the people. You're just kind of throwing little bits out, and then they see that and they're like, oh, this is a fun person, or look at they're doing it. And a lot of times they'll end up reaching out to you, and that's really ultimately the abundance that you want to create. And going back a step before that, remember that you want to actually write down, because you kind of want to reverse engineer what you want. It's really hard to build a social circle if you don't know the type of lifestyle that you want to have. And it goes without saying that different people want different things. Some people want that one love in their life, long-term relationship. Other people want to have lots of different relationships. Some people are more homebodies and they want to build a really nice home. Other people might want to travel around and live in different cities for different periods of time. So really write down what it is that you want, the types of people that you want to have in your life, type of business connections that you want to have, type of romantic connections that you want to have, and really think about that, because it's important. And until you do that, it's really kind of pointless going out and networking, because you really don't have any compass or direction to point you in that way. So write it down, realize that leveraging social media is huge, but also know how to do it in person, because that's a lot of fun. And that's really where a lot of those really in-depth social skills, charisma, and communication come into play, is really in person. But a lot of the systematizing and the networking comes online through social media. And finally, as we touched upon, toxic relationships, it's just in your best interest to end them early. Going back to the analogy, I don't know if I talked about this already, but the analogy of if you ever go to a supermarket and you see a big tank filled up with like lobsters or crabs, they're all kind of nestled at the bottom. And what will happen if you stand there long enough is one will try to ascend up. And what will end up happening is just the others will literally sink on to that crab or lobster and pull it back down. And humans do the same thing. It's generally inadvertent. It's usually because the people that are doing this are kind of living in scarcity as well, and maybe they don't want to lose you or whatever the case may be. But realize that you will have to cut off a lot of connections, but it's in your best interest as well as really the other person's best interest, because again, ultimately, if you stay in that relationship for a long period of time, what will inevitably happen is you will end up resenting that person because you feel like you've just wasted so much time, and you just ultimately won't respect them. So it's better to pull the trigger, take action, and end those early. And hope this video was helpful. It's something I'm super interested in, building social circles. I think it's something that is incredibly powerful, really fun to do. Hope this was helpful. Hope it wasn't too windy, because the wind has been brutal the last several days. But what can you do? Hope you enjoyed it. I'm out.